Hey guys, in this video I'll be comparing Greg Doucette and Mike O'Hearn, two very popular content creators with great physiques. This comparison is going to be more on the fun side and less of a serious one, as I'll be using multiple versions for each of these guys. Furthermore, I'm pretty sure some of these photos for Mike are guest posings, so do keep that in mind. Now before the video does start, if you guys enjoy these videos and want to see more like them, a like and sub would really help out the channel. With that all being said, let's get into this video. Alright, here's the front double, the first pose, and here you can see that both present impressive physiques. Immediately, I noticed that Greg's conditioning is far superior than Mike's. However, like I said, this is probably a guest appearance for Mike. Regardless, Greg's deep cuts and separation in the quads are far better than Mike's, and he shows more detail and definition overall. Mike does have a clear size advantage though, and keep in mind that this is Greg at a classic physique show, not a 212 one, so he will obviously look not as big. That being said, Greg does keep up in the arms, having comparable biceps, and has a more aesthetic V taper. Although Mike's structure is more imposing and he does present more muscle, I've got to give Greg credit. His lines are clearly the cleanest and his conditioning is spot on. He also doesn't fall too short in terms of muscularity, so I'd probably give him the win in this pose. The front lat spread gives you guys a look at 212 Greg Doucette, as now he looks a lot fuller. This is also a different version of Mike, and he also looks pretty impressive as well. His structural superiority is undeniable, and he also presents better lats and a more aesthetic, classical posing style. Greg looks like a completely different competitor here, as in the last shot his aesthetics played a big role into why I gave him the pose. However, here I really dislike his wide-legged stance. He does have a far more conditioned lower body, however Mike decisively wins in the upper half size-wise and doesn't look all too bad in terms of conditioning either. Greg is impressive, however I think that Mike looks a whole lot better and more imposing, regardless of the lower body conditioning disparity. The side chest is an interesting pose, as this is a battle between conditioning and mass. Greg presents some gnarly hamstring and glute separation and has a fully strided far pec, while Mike has a chest that is twice as big, a massive side leg, and a huge arm. Remember, Mike is basically in off-season mode in this picture, whereas Greg is show ready. Neither are in their primes, and the disparity between conditioning and mass is too large, so let's look at another comparison between these two. Alright, here's another look, and now Mike is definitely more conditioned, while Greg presents a little bit more muscularity. Mike now presents much more separation in that side leg, plus some faint striations in the far pec. Greg now has a much fuller look to his chest, a better larger arm, and a much more improved shoulder, however his side leg remains more or less the same. Honestly, I think that any version of Greg, no matter how conditioned, would lose this pose to Mike, especially this more conditioned version of him. Mike just has too much size in the arm and chest, a huge side leg, and a much larger stature. If Greg had, 20 more pounds of muscle, I definitely think he could win, however, that is not the case in this pose. The rear double is a great pose for both for different reasons. Greg is ultra conditioned, presenting insanely ripped hamstrings, probably more ripped than some top pros, and amazing definition in the back. Although Mike isn't as ripped, he does show some hamstring definition and clearly has a thicker but less conditioned back. Mike's traps and triceps do look twice as big as Greg's though. However, since this is a fun comparison, let's take a look at a better version of Greg. This bigger version of Greg definitely puts up a much stronger fight in the upper body and still wins in the lower half. Greg has so much more detail in his back, like those feathered lower lats and strided traps, and he now looks comparable in the arms. It is definitely a battle of mass versus conditioning still, however Greg's shredded lower body and amazing back keep on impressing me. While it is true that Mike has a noticeable size advantage, I do feel more inclined to award Greg the win due to his superior conditioning. The rear lat spread might just be an easy win for Greg, as the gap in conditioning is extremely noticeable here. Mike does have comparable density in his lower back and traps, however Greg has so much more separation and dryness in the back and hamstrings. Moreover, there's virtually no difference in the width of their backs, which leaves me leaning towards Greg for the win. I have no doubt that Mike would probably take this pose if he was in a similar level of condition to Greg, however, as it is, I'm going to give this one to Greg. The side tricep is looking like an easy win for Greg again, as this is unfortunately the only onstage picture of Mike that I could find, and he really isn't putting up a solid fight. Sure, he has a bigger arm, a tighter midsection, thicker chest, and larger side leg. However, Greg's conditioning really carries him here and makes his physique really stand out. Greg's tricep even looks better thanks to his superior separation, and all the fine little details really just enhance his look. To do Mike some justice though, I found this photo shoot picture of him and here he looks outstanding. He looks twice as conditioned as before, his delt and arm look massive, and everything flows extremely well. Greg's conditioning isn't much better than Mike's now, and although I rarely like to use photo shoot pictures, just for this one time, I'll give Mike the advantage to keep this comparison interesting. Here's the ab and thigh, and you can see that we have Greg who hits a nice conventional pose while Mike covers half of his midsection with his arm. It's not much of a problem though, as we can see enough of his midsection and his quads, which allows me to get a good understanding of the pose. Both have tight and defined midsections with genetically good abdominal muscle insertions. Mike appears to have lower inserted lats, which would help him make his V-taper more impressive. However, he isn't hitting the pose to showcase his taper all that well. In contrast, Greg really takes advantage of his small waist and good proportions, showcasing an impressive V-taper thanks to those flaring lats. Looking at the quads, I'd say that Greg definitely has a better set for all the reasons I've previously said. They are so shredded and ripped compared to Mike's, and they really enhance his physique. For the overall pose though, I'd probably go with Greg as well. He hits a conventional shot as opposed to what Mike is doing, which highlights all the positive attributes that he has. I think Mike would fare a lot better if he hit the pose conventionally, however his quads still show way less detail. He does have much more mass and that could potentially give him the win, however in my eyes I would choose Greg in this pose. Here's the last pose, the most muscular, and this might just be a Mike O'Hearn shot. He is so much bigger in terms of muscle and structure, and his conditioning looks pretty impressive in the upper half. Greg does show much more detail in the chest and quads, however Mike's density in the arms, the chest, and the traps coupled with those really dry looking delts makes for an impressive pose. Greg isn't losing badly though, as his arms, delts, and traps all look good and proportional, and his delts might even be better from a roundness standpoint, however Mike is just too big for Greg. In a shot like this, mass and freakiness really prevails unless the conditioning disparity is extremely large, and here it is evident that Mike is much more massive and not too far behind in conditioning. Alright guys, that about does it for this video. In summary, I had this one ending in a 4-4 tie. There were definitely some debatable shots where it could have gone to either of them, and I know that using different versions to the ones in this video could have made the outcome turn out differently. Regardless, I think this was an interesting video, and it was cool to see how these two very popular content creators stacked up against each other. And also, let me know down below what you guys thought of this comparison. Also, let me know if you guys would like to see any more videos comparing other physiques besides, top IFBB pros. With that all being said though, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.